Hi, welcome to the Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class, sponsored by the Hurricane Utah North Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Mike Parker, and since 2008, it's been my privilege to be the instructor for this class. The Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class meets on Thursday evenings between September and May to discuss the scriptures, teachings, and history of the restored Church of Jesus Christ. If you live in or are visiting the Hurricane St. George area, I'd love to have you join us. Time and location are available on the class website. There's a link to that in the show notes just below this video. Also on the class website, you can download my notes, which includes footnotes documenting my sources, this PowerPoint presentation, and handouts that I distribute in class. Please note that this YouTube channel and the class website are not official sites of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Hurricane Utah North Stake, or any other church unit or department. I alone am responsible for the content on these sites. What you're about to see is a recording of my notes for one of the lessons. If you enjoy this video, please click the like button and share it with a friend. And please feel free to subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new content is posted to this channel. My friends, the gospel of Jesus Christ is true. Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, and the authority and keys that he held are now vested in the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And most importantly, Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. I hope you enjoy this lesson. This lesson covers the lives of Joseph and the other 11 sons of Jacob. It's also the last lesson in this course from the Old Testament book of Genesis. I've prepared two handouts for this lesson. The first explains the meanings of the names Jacob gave to his 12 sons. The second compares the prophecy of the latter-day seer named Joseph, as given by the Book of Mormon prophet Lehi in 2 Nephi chapter 3, with the restored version of that prophecy in the Joseph Smith translation of Genesis 50. There's a link in the show notes to download these two handouts as PDFs. You can also go to www.huarc.org to download the handouts, these notes, and this slideshow. Way back, many centuries ago, not long after the Bible began, Jacob lived in the land of Canaan, a fine example of a family man. Jacob, whose name the Lord changed to Israel, lived for 20 years in Haran, where he married Leah and Rachel, the daughters of Laban. He also took Bilhah and Zilpah, the slaves of Leah and Rachel, as concubines. According to the custom of that time, the children they bore were legally Leah and Rachel's children. Israel had 11 sons and one daughter by his 4 wives while living in Haran. He also had one additional son after returning to Canaan. One of the handouts for this lesson has more information about them, but briefly, these sons were, by Leah, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, along with at least one daughter, Dinah. By Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali. By Zilpah, Gad and Asher. By Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. Rachel, Israel's favorite wife, died in childbirth, naming her second son Ben-Aoni, son of my suffering. But Israel called him Ben-Yamin, son of the right hand. As the oldest son, Reuben held the birthright and promise of his father's blessing. However, Israel found out that Reuben had had sexual relations with Bilhah, his father's concubine. Because of this shameful transgression, Reuben lost his birthright. Joseph was the eldest son of Israel's second wife, and therefore in line to receive the birthright. He was much younger than his brothers, and from a wife with whom the relationship with the other wives, especially Leah, was quite strained. In Genesis chapter 37, we learn that Joseph was the favored son and a prophetic dreamer. Genesis 37, verses 2 through 4, King James Version, quote, "These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him." Unquote. Joseph was an honorable young man and faithful to his father. When his brothers were making mischief, Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Some readers would accuse Joseph of being a tattletale. What we should see in this, however, is how Joseph honored and respected his father and behaved better than his elder brothers, even at a youthful age. He obeyed even when he was not under the watchful eye of his father, while his brothers engaged in behavior that their father would not have condoned. The narrative portrays Joseph as faithful to his father in little things, so he would eventually be given authority over greater things. As the first son of his most beloved wife, Joseph was his father's pride and joy. The King James Bible calls Israel's gift to Joseph a coat of many colors. This is a translation based on the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament. The meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain, but it may suggest a richly embroidered overtunic with long sleeves. The typical men's outfit of that time consisted of a shirt-like tunic that covered the torso and upper arms and came to the knees. Over this would be worn a sleeveless coat that also came to the knees. Joseph's coat, on the other hand, likely had sleeves that reached his wrists and was long enough to reach his ankles. It was a garment of distinction and possibly royalty. It clearly set Joseph apart as Israel's favorite son. Joseph's brothers hated him because of his preeminence in their father's eyes. When Joseph began having allegorical dreams about sheaves of grain and stars that implied that his family, even his father and his father's wives, would bow down to him, this really angered his brothers. Rather than thinking that Joseph was rubbing their noses in it, we should remember that these dreams were revelations from God. The brothers' feelings of anger didn't just reflect their dislike for Joseph, but also their unwillingness to accept God's will. Even Joseph's father, Israel, was a bit skeptical, yet he observed the saying. He paid attention to it and did not cast it out as being of no worth. He had respect for the things of God, even if they seemed unlikely and came from unexpected sources. As we're going to see later, Joseph truly was a seer in the same type as Enoch and other ancient prophets. Joseph's reliability was demonstrated further when his father sent him on an errand to find his brothers who were out grazing the flocks. Israel sent Joseph 60 miles, or 94 kilometers, to Shechem, but Joseph went the extra mile to journey another 20 miles, or 15 kilometers, to Dothan to find his brothers. This conscientiousness was one of Joseph's hallmarks, and his faithfulness in small things would carry over into faithfulness in big things later in the story. It's at this point that his brothers conspired to murder him. Reuben, the eldest son, saved Joseph's life with an alternate plan to throw him into an empty cistern used to collect rainwater. A caravan of Ishmaelite traders came into view, and Judah concocted a plan to sell Joseph to them for profit. Joseph was carried as a slave into Egypt. The brothers dipped Joseph's coat in the blood of a freshly slaughtered goat and brought it home to their father, telling him, quote, "We found this. Please examine it to see whether it's your son's tunic or not," unquote. Israel went into deep mourning and swore he would go to his grave lamenting the loss of his beloved son. Genesis chapter 38 is an interlude that cuts away from the story of Joseph to inform us about the character of Judah, who had instigated Joseph's sale into slavery. Judah married a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua, outside the covenant of his fathers. If you've been paying attention so far, you'll know that this is a bad sign. Through her, he had three sons, Onan, and Shelah. Judah's poor example apparently rubbed off on his children. Was wicked, worse than Judah, we assume, because God took Er's life. Highlights a gospel principle taught by Elder Jeffrey R. Holland in 2003. Quote, "Parents simply cannot flirt with skepticism or cynicism, then be surprised when their children expand that flirtation into full-blown romance. If in matters of faith and belief, children are at risk of being swept downstream by this intellectual current or that cultural rapid, we as their parents must be more certain than ever to hold to anchored, unmistakable moorings, clearly recognizable to those of our own household. It won't help anyone if we go over the edge with them, explaining through the roar of the falls all the way down that we really did know the church was true, and that the keys of the priesthood really were lodged there, but we just didn't want to stifle anyone's freedom to think otherwise." I think some parents may not understand that even when they feel secure in their own minds regarding matters of personal testimony, they can nevertheless make that faith too difficult for their children to detect. We can be reasonably active, meeting-going Latter-day Saints, but if we do not live lives of gospel integrity and convey to our children powerful, heartfelt convictions regarding the truthfulness of the restoration and the divine guidance of the church from the first vision to this very hour, then those children may, to our regret but not surprise, turn out not to be visibly active, meeting-going Latter-day Saints, or sometimes anything close to it." Unquote. To understand the rest of the story in Genesis 38, we need to understand the law of Levirate marriage. The word Levirate comes from the Latin levir, meaning husband's brother. In the ancient Near East, women needed men to protect and provide for them. There were no career options for women, let alone single women living on their own. A woman was provided for by her father until she married, by her husband while she was married, and by her male children if her husband died before she did. A woman without male children whose husband died was typically consigned to a life of poverty. Widows were considered tainted goods, so to speak, so there was little chance of remarriage. So, under the principle of Levirate marriage, a man was obligated to marry his dead brother's widow and to provide for her as her new husband. Any children born to such a marriage were considered the heirs of the widow's dead husband and not of the brother who sired them. These sons would receive a share of their late father's estate, which the living brother would hold as a trustee, and they would provide for their mother if she outlived her second husband. So let's continue the story in Genesis 38. After the death of his brother Onan accepted the obligation to marry Tamar, his brother's widow. Onan had sexual relations with her, but each time he did so, he practiced coitus interruptus, or pulled out, as they say, so that she would not conceive. By doing so, Onan exploited Levirate law and the marriage covenant for his own selfish purposes. He got the benefits of marriage, but refused to provide Tamar with the children, support, or long-term security that Levirate marriage was intended to provide. Because what he did was evil, the Lord killed Onan. Judah feared that his third son, Shelah, would also die, so he made up an excuse that he was too young to marry Tamar, when he had no intent of providing him as her next husband. Instead, he shipped Tamar back to her father's house. Having been married twice without children, Tamar had no reasonable hope of remarriage. This put her in cultural and financial limbo on the fringes of society, utterly vulnerable to the whims of others, with few options to provide for herself. Tamar eventually decided to take matters into her own hands. She dressed as a prostitute, put on a veil to conceal her identity, sat at the entrance to the town of Enam, and propositioned Judah as he walked by. Without realizing who she was, Judah accepted her offer, and Tamar became pregnant by her father-in-law. And then comes the interesting conclusion. When Judah discovered that Tamar had turned to prostitution and was pregnant, he ordered her to be put to death by fire for her sins. But Tamar turned the tables on Judah by producing the personal items that he had given her as a guarantee of future payment when she first propositioned him. Confronted by his hypocrisy, Judah was forced to admit that Tamar had been more righteous than he had because he did not fulfill his obligations under Levirate law. Tamar gave birth to twin sons, Pharez and Zerah. Pharez became the ancestor of the royal house of David and eventually Jesus Christ. According to the moral standards of her time, Tamar did what she had to do, and Judah confessed that her actions were more righteous than his had been. The Lord, however, was able to turn even this dysfunctional situation to a positive, ultimate ending. Judah's failure to keep the covenant promises, even while living a life of prominence and privilege, was included in the story partly so that the reader would contrast it with Joseph's faithfulness under the most trying circumstances. Joseph was taken to Egypt in chains, where he was sold to Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard. Joseph's sense of responsibility and his trustworthiness worked to his advantage. Soon he was running Potiphar's entire household, and his master trusted him completely. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and so he caught the eye of Potiphar's wife. Genesis 39, verses 7 through 9, New English Translation. Quote, "Soon after these things, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, 'Have sex with me.' But he refused, saying to his master's wife, 'Look, my master does not give any thought to his household with me here, and everything that he owns he has put into my care. There is no one greater in this household than I am. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So how could I do such a great evil and sin against God?'" Unquote. Joseph refused the advances of Potiphar's wife out of faithfulness to his master. Even though he was a slave, he respected the obligation he had to Potiphar. Violating it would be a sin against his master and his God. Unlike Judah and his other brothers, Joseph kept his covenants, even at great personal risk to himself. But Potiphar's wife kept up the pressure on Joseph, day after day. Moral temptations are often not isolated events. Indeed, the brazen one-time assaults are often easier to resist. It's the tedious, repetitive, insidious, almost inescapable daily assault and whispers that wear most people down. But Joseph did not succumb to temptation. When Potiphar's wife aggressively accosted him one day, he ran out of the house quickly, even when he must have known that he could have gotten away with it, and that running off could put him in jeopardy with Potiphar. Potiphar's wife played the race card. "My husband hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us." And Joseph was thrown into prison on her false testimony. Joseph had now been condemned twice because of his clothing. Joseph was now worse off than before. It was better to be a slave than to be a prisoner. The prophetic dreams he had had about being a ruler or leader must have seemed more unlikely than ever. Keeping the commandments and covenants seems, ironically, to have taken him further from having God's promises fulfilled, while his brothers, who were violating their covenants, were back home, happy, prosperous, and enjoying their illicit relations. We could forgive Joseph if he doubted God's promises, regretted his covenants, or slacked off, but he didn't. He was faithful in all things in the Egyptian prison, and because of his steadfast reliability, he was soon running the place. Elder Hartman Rector Jr. of the 70 taught, quote, Joseph's ability to turn everything into something good appears to be a godly characteristic. Our Heavenly Father always seems able to do this. Everything, no matter how dire, becomes a victory to the Lord. Joseph, although a slave and wholly undeserving of this fate, nevertheless remained faithful to the Lord and continued to live the commandments and made something very good of his degrading circumstances. People like this cannot be defeated because they will not give up. Unquote. In prison, Joseph met the Pharaoh's cupbearer and his chief baker. They had offended Pharaoh, but being of high rank, they had the luxury of having a slave while in prison, and Joseph was given the assignment. The two men each had dreams that Joseph interpreted for them. Joseph told the cupbearer that Pharaoh would lift up your head, or to chin up, as we might say. Everything would work out, and the cupbearer would be back to his position of prominence soon. Joseph only asked the cupbearer to mention his case to Pharaoh after he was restored to his position. Joseph revealed to the baker that Pharaoh would also lift up his head, but by having it chopped off, and he would be impaled, have a stake rammed through his body. Joseph used his gift of seership to tell the truth, not to advance his own self-interest. He could have given both men positive interpretations of their dreams, hoping that at least one of them would help him out. Instead, he simply told the truth. The cupbearer was restored to his position, and the baker was executed, just as Joseph had foretold. The cupbearer, however, promptly forgot about Joseph. I emphasize again that Joseph, like Abraham, like Isaac, and like Jacob, experienced many events in his life in which it seemed that the promises of God would not be fulfilled, and the covenant made with Abraham would come to nothing. His life was filled with cruel ironies and undeserved reversals. He was repeatedly asked to give up what the covenant promised him: preeminence, power, authority, freedom from bondage, for the sake of the covenant itself, obedience to his father and faithfulness to his master. At any point, Joseph could have gotten fed up or cried, "Why me?" or decided that the covenant wasn't worth it, or that God did not keep his promises. Yet Joseph clung to revelation amid everything he suffered. Like Abraham, his great-grandfather, he, against hope, believed in hope. At this point, Joseph was 30 years old. He had been in Egypt for 13 years and had continually sunk lower in status with no reasonable end in sight. 2 years after the cupbearer was restored to his position, Pharaoh had a dream that no one could interpret. The cupbearer remembered Joseph's ability to interpret dreams and told Pharaoh about him. Joseph was brought out of prison, was shaved and washed, had his clothing changed, and was brought before Pharaoh. In this, we see the return of the garment motif. Joseph's fine coat was taken from him when he was sold into slavery. The garment he left with Potiphar's wife got him falsely accused and imprisoned. Now, God returned what had been taken away unjustly from Joseph. He received new clothes before being taken to Pharaoh, the most powerful man in Egypt. Joseph was questioned before Pharaoh. Genesis 41, verses 15 and 16, King James Version, quote, "And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee, that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace." Unquote. Once again, we see Joseph's humility in action. If there was ever a time to build yourself up, it's when you were called before Pharaoh. Joseph could have tried to appear wise and indispensable, but he did not succumb to that temptation. Once again, he attributed his wisdom to God, probably a risky thing to do before a pagan ruler who didn't have much use for Joseph, his people, or his God. I've also found Joseph's example personally inspiring. If I receive a compliment from someone who appreciated something I did or said, I try not to take any personal credit for it. Instead, I pass that person's thanks or praise on to God, who has given me what modest gifts I have so that I may bless other people, not so that I may promote myself. Pharaoh recounted his dream to Joseph. Genesis 41, verses 17 through 24, New English Translation. Quote, "In my dream, I was standing by the edge of the Nile. Then 7 fat and fine-looking cows were coming up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the reeds. Then 7 other cows came up after them. They were scrawny, very bad-looking, and lean. I had never seen such bad-looking cows as these in all the land of Egypt. The lean, bad-looking cows ate up the 7 fat cows. When they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had done so, for they were just as bad-looking as before. Then I woke up. I also saw in my dream 7 heads of grain growing on one stalk, full and good. Then 7 heads of grain, withered and thin and burned with the east wind, were sprouting up after them. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads of grain. So I told all this to the diviner priests, but no one could tell me its meaning." Unquote. Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream to mean that Egypt would experience 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. It's not surprising that the meaning of the dream would be unclear to the Egyptians. Unlike most of the regions of the ancient Near East, Egypt rarely suffered from droughts or famines because the Nile overflowed its banks every year and watered the entire region around it, providing an abundance of food for people and animals. Why would the Egyptians think about preparing for 7 years of famine when such a thing was virtually unheard of in their land? After Joseph correctly interpreted the dream, Pharaoh asked him for his advice on what to do about the impending famine. Joseph suggested putting someone wise in charge of creating a supply of extra grain to use in the lean times. Pharaoh picked Joseph for the task. In an instant, Joseph rose from an obscure, foreign-born, imprisoned slave to become the second in command to one of the most powerful men in the world. Joseph had put his trust in God for 13 years, and his patience and faithfulness were rewarded. Joseph again received new clothes, vestures of fine linen. These were made from the finest cloth available, bleached white by the sun. They were the garments of royalty. In a sense, the royal coat of his father Israel, which was stolen and stained with blood, was returned. His brother's efforts to take the first garment from him resulted in him getting a true royal garment, one that his first coat only foreshadowed. And like his father and great-grandfather, Joseph received a new name, indicating the role of God in Joseph's rebirth from slave to ruler. The account of Joseph's reunion with his family is found in Genesis chapters 41 to 46. The story is quite long. Since you've probably read it or are at least familiar with it, I'd like to make just 2 observations. First, Joseph's tests of his brothers might seem cruel and arbitrary, but his brothers had it coming from the biblical perspective. Joseph had to decide what kind of men his brothers had become. Were they still bitter and resentful of him? Would they still seek his life? What was their attitude toward their youngest brother, Benjamin? Was Benjamin's life in danger because he also was a son of Rachel? Did the brothers respect their father better than they had? Or were they still disobedient, arrogant, and sinful? Second, when Joseph framed his younger brother by placing his precious silver cup into Benjamin's sack, Judah made an impassioned plea on Benjamin's behalf, in which he used the term father 15 times. It's evident that Judah was a changed man. Gone was the person who had sold his brother for money, faked his brother's death, hypocritically pretended to mourn with his father, and had hypocritically accused Tamar when he himself was guilty of the greater sin. Judah's guilt for his misdeeds had softened him, changed him, and pushed him to take the difficult steps necessary to repent. Throughout this story, Joseph serves as a type. He is, of course, a type of Christ. Like Joseph, Jesus was the most loved son of his father. Like Joseph, Jesus descended into spiritual Egypt, places of torment and the pit of the grave, even though he was innocent of any wrongdoing. Jesus was betrayed by one closest to him, who sold him for silver. Jesus was always faithful, and now stands on the right hand of God the Father, as Joseph stood on the right hand of Pharaoh, and as his father's rightful heir. Joseph is also a representation of us. In mortality, many of us will experience terrible reversals, be subject to the sins and injustices brought upon us by others, and even suffer when we keep our promises and our covenants. We may sometimes think that we are getting ahead in the world. Things may improve a little bit, and we may gain a little worldly power and influence, only to lose it all in an instant. Like Joseph, if we faithfully endure these trials without giving up or giving in, we will one day be summoned before the King. We must wait upon him and make ourselves ready when he calls. We must wash ourselves, dress in clean clothes, and present ourselves before him. If we are humble and wise, he will raise us up, put a signet ring on our hand and royal garments of pure white linen upon us. We will be welcomed back into his household as full heirs and rulers with him. Joseph was a great seer who prophesied about his descendants. This tradition is not found in the Old Testament, but it was spoken of by the Book of Mormon prophet Lehi to his youngest son, whom he named Joseph after their ancestor. Lehi himself was a descendant of the ancient prophet Joseph through Joseph's son Manasseh. Lehi told his son Joseph that the Nephites were part of a prophecy made by their ancestor Joseph. 2 Nephi 3 verse 5, quote, "Wherefore Joseph truly saw our day, and he obtained a promise of the Lord, that out of the fruit of his loins the Lord God would raise up a righteous branch unto the house of Israel, not the Messiah, but a branch which was to be broken off. Nevertheless, to be remembered in the covenants of the Lord, that the Messiah should be made manifest unto them in the latter days, in the spirit of power, unto the bringing of them out of darkness unto light, yea, out of hidden darkness, and out of captivity unto freedom." Unquote. Lehi went on to prophesy to his son that these promises would be carried out by another descendant of Joseph of old. This descendant's name would also be Joseph. 2 Nephi 3, verses 7 and 12. Quote, "Yea, Joseph truly said, Thus saith the Lord unto me, A choice seer will I raise up out of the fruit of thy loins, and he shall be esteemed highly among the fruit of thy loins. And unto him will I give commandment, that he shall do a work for the fruit of thy loins, his brethren, which shall be of great worth unto them, even to the bringing of them to the knowledge of the covenants which I have made with thy fathers. Wherefore the fruit of thy loins shall write, and the fruit of the loins of Judah shall write. And that which shall be written by the fruit of thy loins, and also that which shall be written by the fruit of the loins of Judah, shall grow together, unto the confounding of false doctrines, and laying down of contentions, and establishing peace among the fruit of thy loins, and bringing them to the knowledge of their fathers in the latter days, and also to the knowledge of my covenants, saith the Lord." Unquote. This choice seer was the prophet Joseph Smith Jr., who brought these prophecies to light through the Book of Mormon and through his translation of the Bible. Toward the end of his life, Israel blessed Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh was the elder son and deserved the birthright blessing, but Israel switched his hands and gave his blessing to Ephraim. Israel blessed Ephraim, that his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. This was fulfilled in several ways. Ephraim became the dominant tribe in the northern part of David and Solomon's kingdom. When the kingdom was split into two nations after Solomon's death, the northern kingdom of Israel was also called Ephraim. Assyria conquered the northern kingdom in 721 BC. Her inhabitants were carried away as captive slaves. Because of this, the blood of Ephraim has spread throughout the Gentile nations of the earth. In the last days, Ephraim's descendants are being gathered first because they have the responsibility of preparing the way for the gathering of the other tribes. If Ephraim fulfills its commission, the Lord's promise is that the gathered tribes of Israel, quote, shall bring forth their rich treasures unto the children of Ephraim, my servants, and there shall they fall down and be crowned with glory, even in Zion, by the hands of the servants of the Lord, even the children of Ephraim. Behold, this is the blessing of the everlasting God upon the tribes of Israel, and the richer blessing upon the head of Ephraim and his fellows. Unquote. That was D&C 133, verses 30, 32, and 34. That concludes this lesson. If you enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button and leave a comment below. Please subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new lessons are posted to this channel, and visit www.huarc.org to download these notes and this slideshow. In the next lesson, we'll study Moses' call to be a prophet and the Exodus from Egypt. The reading is Exodus chapters 1 through 15. See you next week.